Today's theme is all about the stories that we've banned from our life. And we're weaving together a lot of fantastic quotes from banned books out there because I know that banned books go through the news cycle, unfortunately, frequently, but they have been in the news cycle on and off a lot lately. And so we're going to talk about reshelving our own stories and figuring out the stories that we have banned from our own lives. So, welcome again, and thank you for being here. Before we begin, I want you to take a moment and just consider your world, your inner world, the world around you, the people in it, not just the room that you're in, not just the screen that you're looking at, but the world that's inside of you. I want you to think of it as a library, a sanctuary built of hundreds of stories, a sacred space where every idea, every character within you, and every possible human experience you've ever carried sits on that shelf. So this is your world inside and out. These are your stories, everything happening. If you've ever walked through life thinking, viewing life like it was a movie, just looking at the world as if they can't see you, you're just watching it. I don't know if you've ever had that feeling, but just think of your day-to-day life, the chapters, the eras, the different books that you have shelved from different parts of yourself and the characters that play important parts in that, villains and romances and all of it. So think of that all as your inner world library. Some stories in this inner library are well-worn favorites. We love to talk about them at parties. We love to tell people about that one trip or that one relationship or those things that we absolutely love in our lives. And others are ones that we don't revisit as easily. Others are still unknown to us, and some are still being written. But there are stories on our own shelves that we have banned. And I want you today to really think about not censoring yourself and not telling yourself we're not going to go there, or we're not going to think about this, or we're not going to write about that. Some stories inside of ourselves get banned because they tell the truth too loudly. Some because they hold feelings we were told were too much, or we're worried it's too much. Like we're going to traumatize somebody with what it is that we have to say. Some of our stories, they reveal something we weren't allowed to ever acknowledge, or we're maybe not ready or willing to acknowledge. Not in our homes, not in our relationships or our childhoods, and sometimes not even in our own minds. So there is the quote that for me is made most famous by the band Rage Against the Machine. In their song Testify, but I guess we will credit it to George Orwell from the book 1984. And he wrote, "Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past." And the band would go on to say, testify. So that's what we're going to try to do today. That's what we're going to begin tapping into. And this is something that you can repeat with time, even this exact same prompt that we're going to talk about today, because as you chip away at the surface, you're going to find deeper and deeper truths about what it is you have banned and why you have banned the story from your life. So when we ban pieces of our own past, when we censor parts of ourselves, we hand over the power to tell our story. And today we're going to reclaim it. We're here to reshelve what has been hidden from our lives, to make space for what has been suppressed, to honor the parts of ourselves that were never given their rightful place in our inner library. Alice Walker wrote the book, The Color Purple, and she says the most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. So think about the stories that you have banned, or the ones that you have hidden away because you felt like you didn't have any power. And you don't want to be reminded of that. And I want you to think about, often we don't want to be reminded of these stories that we've banned, but why? Why is it we don't want to be reminded? Often it's because it brings a feeling of discomfort, preoccupation, anxiety, pain. But what's wrong with that? Why is that what feels unsafe to you. And that is what the BeMo practice is all about. And that is exactly how it works, because when you start to create in your own exposure therapy, in your own safe space, when you start to listen to these stories and have that self-connection of being seen, being heard, being known, and you're practicing feeling difficult and uncomfortable feelings, and you're sitting with it in a chosen space longer and longer, that is teaching you not to be comfortable with the uncomfortable, but to be capable of sitting with discomfort long enough to get information from it, to see the bigger picture, to see what actually is in this story, what that information is for you. And there's a big difference between glorifying the struggle and having that victim, martyr, hero versus sitting with it. Those are two different things. And I think a lot of people, when they're trying wildly to find a way out and a way through, especially if you're more of an anxious, preoccupied, fearful type of attachment style, that's when we tend to, get into those like victim, martyr, hero storylines rather than truly practicing feeling a little bit safe in discomfort, feeling safe in vulnerability. And when you don't know how, that's what the BeMo practice teaches you to do, so that especially in your unactivated states, what I like to call those boring days, when you work on it on boring days, which is part of why these events are so great, is because we usually show up to these events not activated, not in a place. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't log in if we're in the middle of a fight, right? Or if we're in the middle of something that's really intense for us. So it is the deactivation of these events that allows us to start to chip away and break through. So in your boring days, when you're most deactivated, is a really fantastic time to really practice sitting with the emotions. Because if you're like me, even the emotion of joy, like feeling comfortable with joy, is difficult. I was very, very good at feeling pain. I was very good at feeling struggle because I was fearful, disorganized, attachment style. I was complex trauma. I was all of these things. So I was well practiced in the bad. That I could do all day long. But also, I wasn't necessarily feeling my way through it. And so it was more of a glorifying the struggle. It was more of a trying to earn a way out by feeling. And that's where, the whole funk method really helps me identify the how. Yeah, but how? How do I get through this? How do I get through this without being a victim, without rising above it as a martyr? Follow me, I can do this, without being a hero, and just being myself, being an authentic human being that is going through something. So today, we'll practice moving through some of these things and unbanning those stories, reshelving some of those stories together. And, to further the analogy of Rage Against the Machine, they would say, take the power back. And that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to take a little bit of our power back gently, bravely, and only at the pace that your mind and body allow. Because this work is not about digging through the past, not about making healing a task. It's about providing safety and practicing in that safety, that emotional safety and security. It's about bringing home the stories that belong to you and allowing yourself to hear and see and know your stories, whether they're uncomfortable or not. If we aren't able to connect to those stories, if we continue to hide those stories, then they manifest in different ways. They manifest in reactions. They manifest in shutting down or in arguing. They manifest in constantly having an issue with our boss, or being triggered by or frustrated with our dogs or our children or the school teacher, and we're just projecting it, right? And it just keeps happening, and it just keeps repeating in these other ways. And so often we get stuck trying to heal the surface of those things. Like, let me heal this relationship in which I'm always arguing, without figuring out how to heal ourselves. And so we're going to chip away at that right now. So today we're going to provide just a single doorway into your inner library This next part of our time together is quiet and personal. No one will see what you write. This is a conversation between you, and there is no judgment here. We're going to use a single sentence prompt that will unlock a truth that's been waiting to be told. When I read it, I want you to write freely. Do not censor yourself. If the story changes, go with it. If it feels unrelated, keep writing, because I guarantee you it probably will reveal something that does connect with the prompt today. Recently, I posted on social media, if you start with what you know, that's ego. When you allow yourself to add to your knowing, as we call it in the BeMo practice, knowing is emotional freedom. So if something comes up for you and you think, I already know this, I know this story, I've been through this, I can promise you there is more to it. So be willing to add to your knowing. The stories we haven't fully explored are the ones that quietly keep on repeating, the ones that repeat in our behaviors. And when we keep healing the surface of our behaviors, then they start to manifest in our bodies. They literally make our mind and body sick. They're just inflaming autoimmune disease and just making us break down because they're trying to say, look, 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 look. So when you're doing the healing deep within, that is not the same as blaming yourself, because that's another thing that especially people with complex trauma will try to do. And so, that lots of people say, especially therapists love to say, it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility. And I used to think of that wrong. I hated that quote. Because I would think, like, I'm stuck with this. It's my responsibility. I didn't do this to myself. But, on the surface, I had an understanding that it was my responsibility to move through it, to deal with it. But I was stuck in dealing. And that's why at BeMo, we talk about feel, deal, reveal, and heal. And many of us are stuck in just dealing with it. And dealing is where you're just healing the surface. Dealing is where you're venting constantly about the thing that happens often. Like, I hate my job and I'm constantly in a fight with so-and-so, and I worry that my friends don't like me anymore. Those things that are just repeating and turning at the surface and, teaching us to go further and further inward. Those are the things that I want you to take note of as behaviors and repetitions in life. And rather than trying to vent about the repeating problem, this is where we take responsibility for the things that aren't our fault. And we're not self-assigning. We're not saying this is our fault. We're learning to have self-therapy and self-analysis through it. We're using the BeMo practice in order to go inside of ourselves and say, what happens with me when these things keep happening? What is it that I'm thinking? What is it that I'm believing? What is it that I can change for myself? And so when you quit just venting, which is what so many journals are all about, when you quit just venting and you actually move forward, you do that second step of journaling, you go into the fun method, and then you rise back out of it with the purposeful positives. When you do these steps, it allows a little bit of exposure therapy. It allows integration, shadow work, parts work. It teaches you to rewrite behaviors, all of it without you having to know that this is going on. And it's doing that so that you see, hear, and know yourself. So when you're willing to just look inside rather than, that typical, like, whose fault is it? Who should be doing this for me? Who am I in a fight with? Who is making me shut down? That's usually the dealing phase that everybody gets stuck in. And dealing is often just trying to change the feeling. And the more you practice with the BeMo practice, you're practicing allowing feelings. The less time you're going to spend dealing, you're going to move straight into revealing how it is you've typically been dealing and how to do it differently. And that information is going to come from within because it can't come from anywhere else. And then you'll spend more time in revealing as you go down this healing journey. You'll start to reveal the bigger picture of the stories that you repeat. You'll start to reveal your healing path, your healing journey, a way forward, who you are becoming versus who you once were, how that integrates. And then you move more into staying in the healing zone. And it's really interesting how that is. And I would love to hear more about it as you're working through your BeMo practice. If you're here today and you don't know what BeMo is, it is a practice. It is a self-therapy practice. It's currently as a journal. It will become so much more than that, but you can use the journal, which has like a 40-page tools and guide in the front of it. And it'll teach you this practice and it'll help you walk through that and give you tools for identification. You don't need a BeMo to join these events. So welcome. So before we begin, a bit of courage from Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird. I wanted you to see what real courage is. It's when you know you're licked before you begin, but you begin anyway. So right now, we're going to begin with today's prompt about unbanning and reshelving our banned stories. And there's a few choices here. So choose whichever one calls to you, or let the pen decide. I have people who write through all of them. So the choices are: the part of me I've kept off the shelf is we weren't allowed to talk about. What I don't want to tell you is, or the story I don't remember is. And I'll repeat those for you in a second to help you get into a creative spirit and maybe write differently than you normally would. And especially because we're here on Substack and everybody's a creative. I'm going to share straight from my journal on this, and strictly meant as inspiration, because I believe when we hear each other share and we hear each other's versions, it will unlock a story. It'll unlock a creativity. It'll send us to a different part of our heart and mind than we normally would. So I wrote, the part of me I've kept off the shelf is the real truths of what I have lived with for so long. The things you've said to me, or maybe even did to me, the things you didn't do for me, and the way it was always somehow my fault. I've been the child in the backseat of too many adult conversations, and I've been the one to keep all your secrets. Yet I never understood how I took all the blame. How am I the one who is so bad when all you ever have to say is the bad things about other people? Everyone besides you. I've talked about a lot of things, but mostly the kind of things that have taught me to keep quiet over time. There's so much more than this. There's so much I've never said out of respect for you. As if you ever thought for a moment about how you were destroying my ability to respect myself. The part of me I've kept off the shelf is the little sliver of time in which they all had me convinced that I was at the end of a life that had killed everyone else. You had me believing that I was the one who was crazy about everything and everyone. You had me believe that it was my job to show up for you, take care of you, give you everything I had and more, while you continued to take away every part of my being. Like an animal too wild to be kept, you led me to the edge of the forest and left me to wander. You ensured I would never find my way home, and hoped that, like all the others, I would just go away. You hoped that I would just die in a way you wouldn't have to look at or notice. Feral on a highway you never travel, but I didn't. I spent a lifetime trying to expose you, and then another trying to teach you, but eventually I gave up. Eventually, I learned that the answer wasn't to lead you to the forest. The answer was to explore the world that was mine, the one without you in it. So the prompts again are: the part of me I've kept off the shelf is we weren't allowed to talk about. What I don't want to tell you is, or the story I don't remember is. And just take 10 minutes or so to begin that. I'm sure it's something that you'll explore again and often. but just 10 minutes to write about the story you've kept off the shelf, the thing you're not allowed to talk about, what you don't want to say, or what you don't remember. And I'll join you. If you just joined, the prompts that we're writing through are the part of me I've kept off the shelf is what we weren't allowed to talk about, what I don't want to tell you is, or the story I don't remember is. We'll give it just about 3 more minutes to write about your band stories, the things that you don't want to remember or think about. The prompt that makes your chest tighten a little bit is usually the one that has a need for being heard. It can be difficult to start something when you don't know how yet. And that's why I encourage you to use this prompt again at another time and repeat it because you'll start to reveal more of the ability to tap into what you don't want to say. But this is your flow. This is the opening to your own inner library. So take 2 more minutes. So every time that you come to the page with a willingness, with bravery, you're paving a new path for yourself. Every time you come to the page with practice, you're practicing that capability. You're practicing your voice. You're practicing security and safety and fulfilling the needs that are yours. Holding your own truth in your hands is not a small act, it's a reclamation. And normally in events, we would go through the entire BeMo practice, but we tend to do just short little glimmers on these Substack lives. So if you want to tap into any of our BeMo events. There's one next Sunday, November 23rd, and there's a couple throughout the season just to take that chance. We usually spend about an hour and a half to 2 hours doing a really deep dive, and you can always sign up for BeMo events at bemojournal.com/events. And I highly recommend taking that time for yourself this time of year. When that time feels impossible is when it is most important. So to put another banned book quote into our banned stories theme here, Joan Didion wrote in the book, The White Album, "We tell ourselves stories in order to live." And I want you to be willing to put your stories, the joyful ones, the wonderful memories, and the terrors on the page, to see it outside of yourself, to literally be able to hold it in your hands and visualize that this has exited you, and then move through the funk method. I want you, if you're already using the BeMo practice, to take what you wrote today, to take that band story that you're putting back on the shelf and make sure you don't just stop now. Make sure that you go move through the entire funk method, which will be at the front of your BeMo journal. Use that feelings wheel and the needs wheel to identify what it is that you need and move through it. And then, the purposeful positives, the last step of the BeMo practice is, I like to refer to it as like shavasana in a yoga practice. You're like coming back to the here and the now, and you're reawakening from what might feel a little bit like a nightmare sometimes, or it might feel like a deep release, like you've had a massage. And it can be difficult work. But if you're beginning with, what do I say? How do I write this? Just start to let it flow, start to chip away, and then be willing to repeat it. Because if you repeat it on the page, you stop repeating it in your life. Gloria Steinem said, "The truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off." And that's actually something that therapists talk about all the time, because when someone is coming out of a depressive era, whether it's a clinical depression or something depressing that has happened, the first emotion that they feel the most is being pissed off. They feel angry. And then a lot of people get stuck back in depression because they don't allow themselves to be angry, or they're angry at the wrong things and the wrong people, and they just don't want to ruin the things that they love. But I encourage you to set yourself free with your stories and be willing to get angry, be willing to get pissed off, as this quote says on the page. Add to that knowing. That knowing is the unbanned part of you. It's the truth that cannot be taken away from you. Write it down and anchor in the truth that you're revealing. And then, yes, do make sure to do your purposeful positives. I do alliteration on purpose, and then I can't even say it in events, so it's kind of funny. But make sure to do those positives of self-recognition, to understand and meet yourself where you are, what you have moved through, congratulate yourself and celebrate yourself. Other things I like to do in my positive step is I like to use 5 senses, just note my surroundings, be mindful of the day, the beauty of the day, things like that, as I'm like coming out of it, that kind of shavasana. So today we stepped into a sanctuary of stories that are your own. They're not stories that are around us, but they're stories that are within us. We found a story, at least the tip of it, that was once banned, and we gave it breath and a voice and a place to exist besides in our bodies and in the shadows of our mind. We're giving it space and light, because light is the only way to see what is in the darkness. And just like children, we are so afraid of lighting up the dark because what is in there, what is under the bed, right? But this is how we are able to see what is true and what is no longer scary. And we're able to move from that dealing into that revealing with the light that we have power over, and then knowing and adding to our knowing. So this is the work of learning how to be with yourself, not by yourself, but by yourself. Does that make sense? It's hard to express without writing it down. So, a lot of us, what I'm essentially saying there is that we feel like we're by ourselves. We feel like we're completely alone. But when you're doing this, you're next to yourself. You're by yourself, not by yourself. The work of building resilience is authentic and unshakable. And Maya Angelou wrote, and I know why the caged bird sings, there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside of you. So today you relieve some of that agony, your story, all of it, the beautiful, the painful, the messy, and the triumphant, deserves to be told, especially to yourself. And this is how we can feel more presence and joy and less activated by the feelings that we don't want to have. We're learning through our own stories that feelings are not the things that we should fear here. Whether good or bad, that's not the fear. We don't have to be afraid of it. So may you leave today feeling a little more whole and a little more courageous and with a renewed sense of ownership over incredible unbanned story that is your life. Make sure to move through the funk method if you are already a BeMo practicer, and make sure to end on a positive note. Thank you for being here. Thank you for showing up with me. And thank you for allowing the change in you to become the change in me. I'll see you guys next time.